You might take one every day, but you probably haven't thought about the layout of an elevator, unless you're a person with a disability. Chances are that you don't really think about any of the human-made physical structures you access each day. Architects and engineers refer to these things and spaces as the built world. It's a world that determines how we live and where we work. You might not have noticed, but much of that physical environment has quite literally been shaped by laws that protect the rights of people with disabilities. Before these laws were passed, places like restaurants, doctors' offices, and schools were not made with disabled people in mind. Being met with barriers such as stairs, narrow doorways, no curb cuts made it difficult, if not impossible, for many people with physical disabilities to access these spaces. Inaccessible buildings and transportation provided a routine reminder that the built world was made strictly for the non-disabled. But all that partially began to change with the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, specifically with the enforcement of Section 504 that prohibits federally funded programs, agencies, and buildings from discriminating against disabled people. Section 504, as it is commonly known, also paved way for the historic signing of the ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act, in 1990. As chronicled in Crip Camp, it took years of relentless advocacy and protest before these laws were passed, and much of it was organized by a group of disabled teenagers who met at a summer camp in upstate New York, Camp Jened. And thanks to these former campers and many other leaders, our built world changed. Among the long list of things the ADA accomplished, like protecting against employment discrimination, it is now a legal requirement for our physical landscapes to be architecturally accessible to disabled people.
Well, before the ADA and even the passage of the regulations, the 504 regulations, it was really, really tough. Anything that I really wanted was at the whim of other people.
We couldn't come into the movie theater if we couldn't transfer out of our wheelchair. We had no expectation of accessible bathrooms. Our expectations basically were low.
In some cases, the change measures in inches. In other instances, entire new structures have been created.
The experience of making this film has radically changed the way I view the world around me.
You've already seen the ADA's impact on our built world. You just may not have noticed it. For instance,
our tax money was going into buses and trains, but we couldn't get on it.
I love the in New York. I used to subway a lot. I used to go to subway climb up and down the steps. I was more worried about the police. I was more worried about the police than I was about getting up and down because the police would stop us.
Did you understand?
No.
So the subways in New York were not accessible at that time. But Neil was able to get around, and what he would do is he would frequently go up and down the stairs on his butt, and the police, instead of helping him, would frequently tell him he couldn't do it. So denying the right to transit.
So before the ADA, most people with physical disabilities couldn't access public transportation. It meant that many people couldn't even leave their homes. But nowadays, public transportation has become accessible for many, adding features like ramps, accessible seating, and elevators in some subway stations. The ADA also has provisions for streets and sidewalks. They can be inaccessible to wheelchair users and people who are blind or low vision. You know those small ramps you see everywhere built into the pavement? Those are curb cuts, and they're meant for a disabled person to safely navigate the streets, not just for your scooter. So now, not only can a wheelchair user easily maneuver between the sidewalk and the street, but a blind or low vision pedestrian can also know when they've reached a street.
And ask anybody who's pushed a stroller how much easier it is to use a curb cut.
Parking lots, too, have been transformed by the ADA.
When I got my car at the age of 17, there were no handicap parking spots. And so I had to find locations where I could get my wheelchair in and out of my station wagon.
It's totally different now. For every 25 parking spaces in a lot, at least one needs to be for accessible parking. And some of those accessible parking spaces must be wide enough for a person with a disability to safely exit a vehicle. And by the way, those reserved parking spaces also follow ADA rules. But what about buildings themselves? Not only were public spaces inaccessible for people with disabilities, but often there were architectural barriers in their private homes as well.
I grew up in a home and I lived on the second floor of a walk-up apartment building, and my parents never thought about moving. My parents thought that the only alternative was to make me walk. And so I spent years and years and years without a wheelchair, walking on crutches, and it really wasn't the best way for me to get around, but it was the only solution that my parents and therapists and non-disabled people had for somebody like Mitch.
Just simply being able to get into businesses where, there's a step up. And so I couldn't get into many places.
But that ramp you usually walk past on a regular day? Yep, that was installed as per the ADA because stairs just don't work for everyone. Ever wonder why there's usually a static door or a gate next to a revolving door? That's right, to make it easier for a person in a wheelchair to access the building. But once inside, a building's interiors could also be a barrier for people with disabilities. Take bathrooms, for instance.
Yeah, I can get into your restaurant, but I want to be able to hang out there for a while. And if your bathroom is not accessible, it's really kind of a no-go for me to be there.
You know those wide bathroom stalls? They're not fitting rooms or places to do your yoga. Those were created to give enough room for wheelchair access. Also, for a wheelchair user, sinks that are too high without leg space are cumbersome. But by following the ADA guidelines, sinks can be installed at the right level to be accessible. And it's not just the buildings and the streets and transportation that need to be ADA compliant. It's the things you never consider. Like that elevator from before, you don't notice it while using it, but the usable parts are at a certain height from the ground to be wheelchair accessible. But here's the thing, it doesn't cater to a person who's blind. Our built world is therefore selectively accessible.
Many people who have a disability and are protected by Section 504 and the Americans with Disabilities Act don't see themselves in this law.
And it's incomplete. Like, not all subway stations have built-in elevators. For instance, only a quarter of New York City's subway stations are accessible. Similarly, restaurants far and wide have yet to adopt Braille menus for blind people. It has been 30 years since the ADA was signed, but its laws are yet to be universally applied to our built world.
I think that some people think that the ADA is, if we follow these rules, we're doing it right. The ADA is a floor, it's not a ceiling.
And that's a problem, because unless it applies everywhere, people with disabilities cannot fully participate in their communities.
If I have to feel thankful about an accessible bathroom, when am I ever going to be equal in the community?
A good first step is to begin thinking about disability rights as basic human rights.
Would you like to see handicapped people depicted as people?
Excuse me?
It can't just be on us as disabled people to be making these changes. It really has to be a societal change.
The ADA actually improves access for all. I mean, think about it. You've probably used the elevators in the subway station. There were some before the ADA, but now entire systems have them. And that's just one example of how we all benefit from the ADA every day.
I think one of the most beautiful things I learned about working on the project was this concept of universal design. And it's the idea that if you design something or you make something that works for all people, it's going to be better for everybody.
So, on any given day, when you do end up using an ADA feature, you have a generation of disability rights activists to thank for that convenience.
So you all have us to thank for this.